So big massive spoiler warning now, cause I don't have the patience to prep y'all for them during the main body of the video. I'm going to be talking about a bunch of different aspects of Star Wars and other things that I feel I need to make parallels to. So yeah, here's my heartfelt apology if I potentially ruin anything for you. Also, I listened to the Rogue One book after I wrote and recorded this script. I was still pressed for time on getting this video out, but I will be trying to mend things as I go, so again, another apology if this video seems a little disjointed at parts. Star Wars and I are an interesting pair. I've seen all the movies, pretty much all the TV shows, and married what I would call a textbook superfan. Yet, despite all that, I really can't say I honestly even like the series as a whole. If you ask me what my favorite movie would be, I would say Rogue One. This is often followed up by either asking for an explanation or some form of, oh, you're one of those fans, or some snarky remark on how I like it for the sake of being a contrarian. You know why I like Rogue One? Because it's a really good movie. It also is one of the best cold opens I've seen in any piece of Star Wars media. I saw it in theaters, rewatched it when we got Disney Plus, then watched it again recently because a certain director of advanced weapons research has finally wormed his way into my brain, and I just needed to let it happen. 9 years I tried to keep this guy at bay, 9 years of me just not really liking Star Wars and not wanting to get invested in a character, and then BAM! He gets announced for Andor 2 and the rest is history. I'm talking about Krennic. Orson Callan Krennic. Also, as of writing this video, the actual trailer for Andor 2 dropped in. I am not well. Such small morsels, but I'll take them. So I remember most of Rogue One, I tell myself. Then I go to ask my partner, who has read many of the books, both legends and canon, and they tell me about the Rogue One prequel called Catalyst. I go to Audible, it's on sale, let's give it a go. Several weeks of struggling later. Guys, I got reminded of why I don't like Star Wars. Okay, let's back up a bit and talk about why Rogue One is my favorite movie, because I feel I'll need to give that context before I go into the utter nightmare that is Catalyst. Rogue One, released in 2016, was the second movie in the franchise released under Disney. It follows right before Episode 4, A New Hope, and is about a teen who finds the Death Star plans so the rebellion can eventually destroy it. When this movie got announced, most people brushed it off thinking it was going to be awful or a cash grab. I did as well, because at the time, despite liking Force Awakens, I still had a fairly cynical mindset about the franchise as a whole. And yes, please remember, I am married to a person who owns more Star Wars shirts than normal ones. 75% of all the items in our house are Star Wars in some capacity. This does not mean that my views and takes on the franchise changed. They're 100% supportive in my right to criticize the media. Then we went to go see the movie, and holy cow, we were hooked. We both absolutely loved it and thought Jyn and/or Krennic and all of them were amazing additions to the canon list of characters. This movie put hope in us that the Disney run of Star Wars was going to be good. Carry on past a few releases, Mando comes out, then Andor, and despite some hiccups, yeah, we're enjoying the current run a lot. When it comes to Star Wars, I actually do enjoy the shows more than anything. I'm a huge fan of the later seasons of Rebels and Clone Wars. I love Bad Batch, Mando is fantastic, and oh my lord do I love Andor. There's a pretty obvious pattern starting to form. I prefer Star Wars when it focuses more on people and less on space wizards. I wasn't ever able to really form connections with characters like Luke, Anakin, Obi-Wan, or Rey, because despite them being our heroes, they felt one note and frustrating. I'm also a grown adult and these movies are made for children, whereas the shows have been catering more so to older audiences. This doesn't mean I don't enjoy the movies from time to time, but Rogue One really did just come out and say, hey, this movie might bore your kids, but this one's for you, grown-up Star Wars fans. Characters like Din, Andor, Mon, and Deirdre feel more fleshed out. Yes, I understand that a TV show gives us more time to breathe and learn about them, their motives, environments, narratives, etc. Though if this is the case, why do I like Jyn, Galen, and Krennic so much? I suppose this folds back to my original subject, why I like Rogue One so much. The story of Rogue One works in pretty much any kind of setting. It being in Star Wars doesn't make it unique. Evil military officer is hunting down a scientist, kills his family, then the child of said scientist proceeds to live out their life until they are forced into a situation to help bring an end to the bad guys by way of trying to find their father. It's a small narrative with a healthy roster of characters who don't outstay their welcome, and the last 30 minutes is some of the best on-screen wartime I've seen in a science fiction in a while. It's not overblown, it has amazing tension, and you finally get to see the actual scale of the Empire and what the rebels are up against. Also, Jyn isn't a space lizard. She's not even that important to the whole of the Star Wars universe. She's a girl whose father was taken from her, then tried to live her life as best she could. Her doing the morally right thing was ultimately her getting revenge on the man who took her father from her, and even then, she didn't. Andor was the one who wounded Krennic, then urged Jyn to leave it be. By how I'm describing her, it sounds like I'm saying she's really a nothing character, but I'm championing for quite the opposite. I love that Jyn is not a conventional Star Wars hero, and how small and concentrated her character is to this one story. Yes, it's a shame we won't ever see more of her, but honestly, I'm okay with that. Her existing in this one moment in time, and to be amazing while doing it, is all we ever needed. This is also the reason I love Andor. If you think people had low expectations for Rogue One, they had even less for Andor. Due to his character and appearance in the movie, no one thought this show would be good or even interesting, and it smashed it out of the park. They managed to take a random character like Andor, as well as Mon Mothma, and make an extremely compelling drama while also introducing some banger characters in the form of Cyril, Deidre, and Luthen. With its success, Season 2 is coming out, and again, they announced Krennic was going to be in it. KT, if that's the case, why not wait for Season 2 to come out then make this video? Because this video isn't me making an in-depth discussion about Andor. It's about the funny little concept of less is more. Something Star Wars and a lot of Western media seem to despise. You know who my two other favorite Star Wars characters are? Tarkin and Thrawn. If you've only seen the nudies, you know Tarkin is the old guy who bosses people around, then explodes. And if you've only seen the nudies, then you have no idea who Thrawn even is. Both of these characters had existed in Star Wars for a long time, Tarkin getting development during the Legends boom of the books starting in the early 90s, Thrawn also being introduced at the same time. Of course, after Disney bought Star Wars, all of this went away, and we got the new canon. Tarkin has had a few books and has been in comics, as well as new canon events given to him in Rogue One, Clone Wars, and Bad Batch. While Thrawn has been given 2 trilogies of books, as well as again some comics, and his proper introduction into the current on-screen media as the primary villain in Rebels, and subsequently Ahsoka. So in an effort to do what I can for this video, I figured I might as well look into them, and yeah, that was a mistake. Yeah, I ain't reading all that. So why do I like these two? Tarkin is your typical military man, but he's played by Peter Cushing, and I love any role Peter plays. I have since I was a kid. So for him, it was really just me enjoying the performance of an amazing actor. The same can be said for Guy Henry in Rogue One. Yes, we all got annoyed at CGI Tarkin, but it really doesn't bother me. It's just nice to see the character again, and in a capacity in which I actually enjoy him. I don't have any issues with animated Tarkin, but there are some instances where my man is looking rough. I'm looking at you, early Clone Wars. Thrawn is a little more complicated. I liked the blue guy in Star Wars because he was always described to me as being the Sherlock Holmes of space, and Lars Mikkelsen's performance of him in Rebels is top-notch, this bleeding over into Ahsoka, where he gets to reprise the role in a live-action setting. He's also one of my partner's favorite characters, so we got to bond over the fact that he, along with Tarkin, were my Star Wars exceptions. But as I said, yeah, if you've only seen the nudies, you have no idea who he is, and this guy has gotten even more written about him than I think even Anakin Skywalker does. And they're still developing his character. With how the Mandoverse is being set up, it's obvious that Thrawn and the Chiss are going to become the big bads of the show, and this climax is meant to be a feature film. And oh man, I don't know how they're gonna explain all this to a general audience. Disney has already proved with Solo that they can't really do big Star Wars cinematic universe, which is why they switched over to doing the shows in the short series like Tales of the Jedi and so forth, which are actually good. I do recommend you watch those. Unless you're not a fan of Ahsoka, then maybe refrain. But KT, I've read all the books and the comics and all the accompanying annuals. It's all so good. Yeah, because you're a Star Wars fan, and I respect that. Trust me, I love a good deep dive as much as the next person, but even this is too much for me. But that's how you learn everything. Read the comics at least. Look, as someone who got way too invested in Green Lanterns for a long time, don't get me started on comic books. I respect the grind, but it can be one of the most soul-crushing deep dives of an ask for someone just starting out. The constant level of disappointment I got bombarded with is not something I want to relive. Can you read the Rogue One comic at least? Ugh, God, oh my God, okay, fine. I could be sitting here listening to my stories right now, but no, I gotta read this goofy comic. There, I did it. You happy? Now let me listen to my stories! Honestly, this page in the comic is probably the most heart-wrenching thing I've seen in the whole of Rogue One. This is literally all you need to explain Krennic and Galen's relationship. God, if this was in the movie, I would have broken down and cried. Okay, back to Thrawn for a hot minute. My whole understanding of him from the viewpoint of only ever watching the show is that, yeah, he was Blue Sherlock Holmes. That he did what he did for the thrill of the hunt and joined the Empire to further it. This is how he's portrayed in Rebels, and it's a treat. When learning about his extended lore, I got more and more disappointed over the fact that his intelligence and skills were only being used to potentially undermine the Empire and bring about Chiss supremacy. Man, that sounds awfully familiar. Oh yeah, Anakin and Palpatine. It's like poetry. It rhymes. This is getting out of hand. Yes, I know I'm missing all the funny nuance and character moments that make these stories actually worth reading, and I genuinely want to, but taking the time to sit down and read and/or listen to a huge amount of media is a massive ask to a layperson. Am I saying Disney should tone it down? Of course not. I'm glad Thrawn is so important in the current canon, because yeah, like I said, I love the blue guy from Star Wars. But good grief, did they lay it on a lot thicker than it needed to be. We really didn't need all of this to explain who or what this guy is. Okay, KT, I feel we got a little off track. I thought this video was about Rogue One and Krennic. Well, yeah, it is, but I gotta set up some stuff. Is this the part where you explain where, despite all this stuff about Tarkin and Thrawn, Krennic is still your favorite? Yes, it is. Okay, firstly, I will openly admit, he is very handsome. His portrayal from Ben Mendelsohn also makes him extremely charismatic and an interesting watch. And I do have a soft spot for domestic military baddies, hence Tarkin and Thrawn. Even Piet and Veers. Hell, let's add Deidre to the list. She's becoming wifey material. You see the trope of Star Wars characters I like. It's pretty blatant. But Krennic takes the cake. If I was able to trademark the term KT character, Krennic would fall into that category with no effort. Am I going to explain this? No, I do not have the time or wherewithal to attempt. Okay, now that all of that's out of the way, let's fold back into Rogue One and Catalyst. The nudie concept of Krennic is pretty easy to understand. Evil military guy, does bad guy things, he has a spat with Tarkin, goes to check some emails, then dies. That's literally him. I'm not even joking. Yes, the Rogue One book expands upon him in a way that makes him so much more interesting, but it doesn't detract from his on-screen counterpart. You will always have a special place in my heart, Book Krennic. So like any good fan of some random guy, I decided to do a little digging into his extended lore. Cause like yeah, this is Star Wars. The most random people have names and additions, like Dunstig here. This name shows up in Rogue One for like 2 seconds, but here he is, being a nugget. So I asked my partner about this book, they tell me about Catalyst, and we get a repeat of what happened at the beginning of this video. This book is awful in every respect of the word. It isn't even because of what it does to Krennic. No, the depiction of Krennic in this book is so bog standard and one note that I can't even be insulted by the interpretation. Oh wait, yes I can. So I listened to this book before rewatching Rogue One, because I hate myself, and thinking back to the overly pompous nature of Krennic portrayed in it as opposed to the more poised tyrant we got in the movie makes me extremely frustrated. Do I enjoy generic villain moments? Oh yes. I especially loved any time Krennic and Galen were alone and Krennic is trying to convince him that he's essentially the better wife. I'm not even joking. The weird undertones in this book of it being Krennic versus Lyra had me nearly dying of laughter. There's a whole section where Krennic is constantly fussing over Galen and straight up tells him that he's trying to do what's best for him and that he shouldn't listen to his wife. Krennic will grab this man by the arms and straight up love bomb him. It's insane. Krennic, it's okay if you got a sprig of lavender in your hat, but you need to calm down. The Krennic in the Rogue One book is also a lot more aggressive in his nature and has the same types of jealousies, but they're written in a way that organically fit into who we see on screen. The novelization adds to what is already present. He will often lament his loss of Galen, but in ways that actually fit into Krennic's idealized narratives of his story, not his friends. I also refuse to let the age of the character be a factor in this, because other than a few exceptions, Star Wars has never really cared about subtle character growth, least of all in its villains. I refuse to assume Krennic became that one exception. That title belongs to Callus. Come back, son, I miss you. This book does try to at least explain his backstory and how he got to where he was, but not really. It goes from Krennic being within the Corps of Engineers, then him somehow finding his way into the precursor of the ISB. The guys who dress in white and act like evil space cops. Then him eventually taking over Project Stardust, which is the code name for the Death Star. I'm not even going to attempt to break any of this down because it's honestly pointless, and again, Krennic isn't actually the reason why I consider this book to be bad. The other focus is Galen Erso, Jen's father and one of the architects of the Death Star, as portrayed in Rogue One. We learn that he and Krennic have a long-standing history together, both having met in the Corps of Engineers, then went their separate ways during the war against the Separatists. Krennic joined the military while Galen chose to stay out of the conflict and continue his research on kyber crystals. After all that, Krennic weasels his way into the Death Star stuff, then secretly goes and gets Galen and Lyra and the child. The first third of this book is honestly fine. It's a good setup for how the characters are, but once Tarkin is added to the mix, it just falls apart. I'm going to save you all some guff and just explain why that is. So Tarkin, we all know him, old guy who bosses people around that explodes, yeah. If you know extended Lord Tarkin, you know that he's an extremely collected individual who is an intelligent tactician and one of the right hands of the Emperor. He's also a masterful warrior who could rip your throat out without even trying. It really is too bad that this guy is only ever in cartoons. The book, simply titled Tarkin, explains his whole backstory and the planet he came from, as well as his time as governor during the rise of the Separatist movement. Despite the book actually just being a buddy comedy about him and Vader trying to get his ship back, all of the additional development is interesting. I loved learning about Iriadu, Tarkin's family, and the long-standing tradition of his birthright amongst the Carrion Plateau. Also, Palpatine's obsession with horoscopes is extremely funny, and I will take every opportunity to bring it up in conversation. I'm also going to point out that Tarkin is constantly described as having red hair, but every young variant of him has brown to auburn. Stop being cowards! Make Tarkin ginger! Pull it back, KT, pull it back! I will, in a minute. The entire time I was listening to Catalyst, I was live tweeting my reaction to my friends and my partner, and this is probably the most memorable moment of that. Allow me to explain. So in Rogue One, the little spats between Krennic and Tarkin are seen as just that. Tarkin obviously holds authority over Krennic due to his ranking connections to the Emperor, and from what we know from Episode 4, he is in command of the Death Star. We also get from subtext that Krennic would want command of this project because he's literally the one who built it, spending over 15 years to make it happen. Tarkin brings up the amount of setbacks he's had and the leak of information being the last straw, he using it as a sign to paint him as incompetent to the Emperor and even Vader. Krennic takes matters into his own hands and goes to confront Galen, yada yada, more plot. Later, Tarkin does what is very in character for him. Due to him having the Death Star under his command, he takes it to Scarif and essentially kills two birds with one stone. He takes out a mass of rebels and the one person who has been giving him grief for longer than he cared to deal with. So I read Krennic and Tarkin's relationship via the movie as this. Krennic is the architect of the project. He has been given it after the plans were taken from Count Dooku. That's a whole other thing I'm not getting into. During the time of building it, due to the NASA scope of the project and Galen's sudden departure, Krennic was faced with several setbacks. This causing Tarkin, amongst others, to see him incapable of running things. Krennic eventually manages to find Galen and keep him under lockdown so the primary weapon of the Death Star can be built. Through this 15 years, bickering on who would take command of the weapon once it's ultimately complete becomes problematic. Krennic hoping it'd stay with him, Tarkin wanting to take over leadership. This due to him being a Grand Admiral and Krennic just being a commander. Though this whole time, Palpatine has most likely already promised it to him. Once Krennic becomes director, we have no time frame for that, he becomes more confident in the fact that he will take the command position, so Tarkin just lets him think that and goes about quietly chiding the director as one does. So during the successful weapons test, Tarkin finally strikes at Krennic, catching him off guard. The director is obviously upset, the Moff playfully giving him one last chance. Obviously that's a lot of reading between the lines. I'm using my knowledge of Tarkin and how I'd potentially write these characters. It's a lot of bias, but we do what we can. But for me, Tarkin and Krennic are written as almost brothers trying to gain the affections of the parent, but one already has it and the other is struggling to maintain what little he has. There is no way, given what we know, that Palpatine would ever favor Krennic over Tarkin. Tarkin has no reason to even think of him as a rival. There is no conflict. This is little brother talking back to big brother and him just going, aw, how cute. See why I like Tarkin? Because this is pretty much how he is. He really doesn't perceive anyone as a threat because he was literally raised from birth to be an apex predator. And the irony is that that confidence is what ultimately gets him killed. And here's the kicker of all this. The Rogue One book actually confirms a lot of this with how Tarkin and Krennic are written. Krennic often sees Tarkin as a rival, constantly having internal monologues about how the Admiral is trying to sabotage him. He even goes so far believing that those under his command, the primary crew of the Death Star, would never kneel to Tarkin if he assumed the leadership role of the station. Their rivalry is a fabrication of Krennic's. Tarkin, on the other hand, cares very little for the director by this point and has been using his own resources to gain information that would cause Krennic to look worse, something Krennic's already been doing to himself. Tarkin knew about Galen's betrayal before the director did. He actively uses the fact that he has spies in Krennic's ranks as more salt to the wound. The very idea of this causes the director to pace around the Death Star, hoping to find some flaw from Tarkin. But guess what? Tarkin hasn't actually physically done anything. But he has done what he does best. He's used a very simple mind game to cause the already frayed director to fray even more. Plant the seeds, watch them fester. There he is. There's the man I fell in love with, using people's own ambitions and arrogance against them like a literal bomb. There is no rivalry, just Tarkin quietly smiling and waiting. I also wanted to quickly point out that Dunstig, Krennic's second, is seen on the bridge of the Death Star. There's no real reason given as to why he stays behind, considering he's also Krennic's pilot, but if you put together what happens in the book, it's a fun little nod to Krennic's last potential mind game to Tarkin before he dies. In the book, Krennic decides to go to Scarif in secret so Tarkin wouldn't know of his plan. This means he most likely left Dunstig on the Death Star so as a way to keep the Admiral off his scent. When Tarkin gets the news of the rebels attacking Scarif, he's surprised Krennic is even there. So yeah, a fun little bit of character plot. I enjoy it. Where is Director Krennic? Nap, sir. It's late. Nap. So why are you here? Commanding the deck, sir. It's my job when the director's away, sir. See what I mean by the Rogue One book? It's a really good read. You know what happens in Catalyst? Oh boy, let me tell you, because everyone I know who is a massive Star Wars fan and sees Tarkin as well how we all know him, got horribly confused and understood why I said this book almost ruined him for me. I need a bit more context before I get to the kicker. My apologies. So there's a moment where Tarkin captures this guy who helped Krennic get Galen back. His name is Hass. He's actually not important, and I don't know why he exists in this book other than, well, honestly, I don't know. Tarkin captures Hass. Hass spills the beans that he was helping Krennic and that Krennic has Galen. Tarkin is very surprised by this information and hatches a cunning plan. Wait, so you're telling me that Governor Grand Admiral Moff Williff Tarkin didn't know Krennic had Galen with him on Coruscant? Galen is on Coruscant the entire time this book is going on. You know that big city planet that all the Imperials hang out on? Yeah. Let me talk about this cunning plan, because oh man, this is the massive kicker. Tarkin decides to let Hass go free so he can keep doing shady stuff for Krennic. Krennic ain't about that life anymore, but he still chooses to meet up with Hass because he suspects something is going on. In the meantime, Galen and Lyra have decided to just run off into the city during a big celebration. No plans, no nothing, with the child. And conveniently run into Saw. Saw whisks them the way to freedom. Krennic has his sad boyfriend moment in the rain, yelling Galen's name, and it turns out the reason Galen got away is because Tarkin did it to make Krennic look a fool. Because he's jealous of Krennic. Good old Tarky is jealous of Orson Callan Krennic. Little fun fact, after I read, wrote, and voiced all of that nonsense, I found out about something called the Tarkin Initiative. It's basically a committee set up by the governor to oversee military projects such as Project Necromancer, Project Stardust, and so forth. Guess who's the primary supervisor of this committee? Besides Tarkin? Krennic. And guess what? The concept of this is in Rogue One, and it's mentioned in the Rogue One book. But guess where it isn't mentioned? Catalyst. I'm going to talk about the on-screen timeline for a hot minute, because Star Wars is really bad about actually showing the passage of time. I'll use Jin's age as a reference point. Jin is 24. The time between episode 3 and episode 4 is 19 years, Rogue One is right before episode 4. Krennic took Galen 15 years before Rogue One. Krennic rescued Galen and Lyra and the child when she was still a baby. Bad Batch is also 19 years before Rogue One. This bit is important. So let's go over this. Jin was born between episode 1 and 2. That checks out. Krennic, at the time, was a lieutenant commander during the war with the Separatists. This means Galen and Lyra would have been rescued by Krennic and brought back to Coruscant just to work on things for the Republic, not Project Stardust. This due to the fact that we wouldn't have properly had the Death Star plans yet. These are taken from Dooku after all the stuff on Geonosis happens. With Bad Batch, we see Commander Krennic with Tarkin at a meeting with other members of the Tarkin Initiative. By this point in the book, the Death Star is already being built. This can be mildly backed up by its appearance at the end of Episode 3. Carry on 4 years, Galen is found again by Krennic, and we get the beginning of Rogue One. The biggest reason for all this is because Tarkin saw Krennic as a valuable asset to not only the military, but weapons development, which means it would behoove Krennic to not hide things from him, mainly Galen. Tarkin would have known who Galen was due to his research focusing on kyber crystals, something the Jedi frowned upon. There is no way Galen would have been hidden by Krennic. Krennic's reasoning in the book is because he's a bad guy and doesn't want Galen to know what he's up to. You can have all that and still have Tarkin know. You'll know that, right? Because according to Catalyst, by the time we get to this stage of development of the Death Star, Krennic and Tarkin would have been in each other's business for a while. Yes, Tarkin was off fighting separatists and rebels, but due to the fact of the Tarkin Initiative being a thing, I really doubt he'd not keep an eye on his own committee's biggest project. And these guys are Imperials, they literally spy on each other for fun. And in the Season 2 episodes of Bad Batch, The Summit, and Plan 99, we see the Tarkin Initiative gathered, and oh look, it's baby Commander Krennic, not being a complete prick and constantly arguing with Tarkin. Man says like 2 lines. I'm honestly surprised Ben voiced him.
Yes, Governor Tarkin.
Tarkin wouldn't just put anyone in that position. Krennic has to have some extended track record of success for the governor to see past his arrogance. You could argue someone else put him in that position, but no, it was Tarkin. I don't know the time frame for the creation of the Tarkin Initiative. It would have been either during Episode 3 or right after, when the Republic became the Empire. But Catalyst conflicts with that because Project Stardust would have been well before. So when was the Death Star actually being built? I honestly don't have an answer for this because like most things in this series, it's gotten muddied down by so many comics, books, and other media, it's almost impossible to find a concrete time frame. And I've honestly gotten to the point where I can't trust open source domains for information. Okay, back to the fellas. Rogue One is the end of their relationship. It's the final mark in a long list of inevitable outcomes. And honestly, if my timeline is correct, it's been over 20 years, and you honestly can't really blame them for growing resentment. Tarkin himself has become more arrogant due to his need for control and power. Krennic is finally proving to be the one thorn in his side he's having trouble removing. Catalyst also paints Galen as being fairly dumb and an aloof coward. He spends most of his time just lost in his research while neglecting his wife and daughter, and any time Krennic goes to see him, he's more infatuated with the machinations of his friend. This obviously makes sense given their history and this taking place when they're younger, but the fact it takes Galen until the very last second to realize his family is more important than some rocks really makes him such a loser. In Rogue One, the beginning conflict shows that Galen isn't one for war and wants to protect his family, going so far as to say his wife is dead in order to try and get Krennic to not search for them. Lyra, knowing this most likely won't be the case, cares more for the safety of her daughter and hides her, she then going back to aid her husband. Krennic does the obvious thing of threatening her, then orders the trooper to fire, Lyra managing to get a shot off before she goes down. The commander's last orders were then to find the child. When we're reintroduced to Galen, he's getting a message to Saw and even Jyn, seeing how he did all he could to sabotage the Death Star despite the potential threat of Krennic having and harming her. And at his ultimate end, he even goes so far as trying to protect his team, Krennic ruthlessly gunning them down in order to further hurt Galen. Though Galen is obviously still not one for violence, his ability to want to protect others comes through way stronger than the nonsense of Catalyst. He's a more compelling character, and it makes more sense why he and Krennic were originally friends. They both showed drive and conviction for the project they were tasked to do. The only difference is Galen got cold feet after he figured out what it was, and Krennic refused to let him go. More reading between the lines in Rogue One, it feels more like Krennic and Galen were actually in charge of Project Stardust, not just Krennic. Galen being the lead scientist while the commander oversaw the project. In Catalyst, Galen is only a part of Celestial Power, the project code name for the Death Star weapon. One of the opening lines in Rogue One is "The project is stalled, we need you to come back" by Krennic. This shows he's trying to take this abandonment as a mere road bump and not some personal attack. But when Lyra openly threatens the commander, it shows how much resentment she has for Krennic and is finally stepping in for Galen. She's not assuming her husband is ignorant like her book counterpart does, she is merely acting on her instincts and trying to protect her family. Yeah, and the Rogue One novelization helped solidify pretty much all of their characterizations. The book shows that yes, the two were the primary leads of Project Stardust, Krennic merely lying to Galen about the darker details. When Galen finds out, he urges to his friend to continue the project without him, insisting that Krennic has the capability to. Orson doesn't want to do it on his own, trying to get Galen to stay, the scientist ultimately fleeing. This is possibly the one thing I love about this book more than anything. Even to the bitter end, Galen still believes Krennic had the skill to do the entire project on his own. He constantly iterates this. You can tell just by this dialogue alone that he believed in Orson. But Krennic's thirst for power and control made him more demanding of leadership and recognition than anything else. There are still small moments where the two care for one another. Even as Krennic dies, he thinks back to his earlier life, trying to find times when Galen wasn't a part of it. His final scene in the book almost made me cry with how beautifully written it was. Catalyst just makes him suck. He really does just suck. One note, bog standard, I'm the baddie bad guy. I also didn't want to put this in here, but I really need to. I've got beef with the guy who reads both Rogue One and Catalyst. He managed to pretty much do all the other characters justice, except Krennic. I don't know why this guy thought he could do a better Krennic than Ben, but no, he can't. Sometimes the actor maketh the character. In the case of Krennic, this is 100% true. Ben is Krennic, Krennic is Ben. End of. I really need to end this video. With the additions of Krennic and Tarkin in more recent shows such as Bad Batch and Andor being successful, I think the current canon is trying to quietly sweep the characterizations in Catalyst under the rug. They'll obviously keep the initial lore bits explaining Krennic's backstory, but the whole ridiculous rivalry between he and Tarkin shouldn't exist. It literally adds nothing to the characters and makes Tarkin look like a pathetic prick. At this point, the little bits of character lore Ben himself has made for Krennic are more interesting than anything Catalyst has. Give me more Ben Krennic lore. If you read this book and liked it, that's fine. I'm not gonna fault you on it, but if my encyclopedia of a partner didn't even remember it, that's a pretty worrying sign. This is the person that if I point to a random character in a movie, they'll know their name and everything about them. When I sat down and told them the ending of Catalyst, the amount of disgust on their face was palatable. Y'all can't in all good conscience tell me y'all are fine with this depiction of Tarkin. I don't know how anyone could be okay with it. So that whole less is more bit I was going on about. Yeah, when it comes to Star Wars, sometimes we don't need a whole book explaining a character, because ultimately, it's not gonna matter to 99% of the people who consume this media. But for those of us who want more, maybe you should actually make it good and not potentially ruin one of your legacy characters. And speaking of legacy characters, there's an interesting irony of that when it comes to the good director. The concept of him actually existed well before Rogue One, he being a potential character in the defunct Star Wars TV show. And he was also originally going to be planned as one of the reoccurring villains in Rebels, but that got scrapped. And oh man, thank goodness for that, because that would have been awful. Krennic doesn't need comics or books or all that. Yes, I'm excited to see him in Andor 2. I hope he's given a good story and Ben is able to have fun portraying this amazing character, but after that, just leave him be. KT, are you gatekeeping? Yeah, in a way, but I'm gatekeeping Krennic from the people who made him. Yes, Krennic showing up in Andor 2 is why I started getting into him more, but Rogue One is the reason I liked him to begin with. I really didn't need the initiative, just a little shove. And honestly, Thrawn was already going to do that, so it was inevitable. I also just want to like Star Wars characters without some random a-hole coming up to me and saying I'm not a real fan because I haven't read the 15 books and mountains of comics that the characters I like are in. I hate that crap. Just let me like this goofy idiot in peace. They're never gonna make a show focused on Imperials, they're never gonna make Krennic good outside of Ben playing him, and they're never gonna make Tarkin ginger. These are the few things in this world I want that I know I can never have, so yeah, just let me suffer in silence while I collect crusty pieces of cardboard and plastic of this random fella. If you made it this far into the video and are frustrated with Star Wars having too much lore, honestly, just watch Andor and Bad Batch. They're two really good shows that don't bog you down with Jedi nonsense and expect you to know tons of additional side stuff. Bad Batch is finished and Andor is only going to be 2 seasons, Rogue One making it a nice trilogy. Also, there's sort of an unwritten rule from proper Star Wars fans that if it happens in the book, it won't happen on screen. And that, most of the time, the on-screen timeline is the de facto 100% accurate canon. So yeah, I made a whole video complaining about a book that you literally don't need to read, but I need an excuse to talk about Krennic. I also don't want people to watch Andor 2 and then go out and read Catalyst. Please do yourself a favor and don't. Just ignore it. But read the Rogue One book, it's amazing. I probably got a lot of the underlying lore incorrect, but my god, this video was impossible to actually do research on. I feel like with Star Wars, if you don't just physically get down into the dirt and dig through all the media yourself, you're never gonna get a clear answer on anything. If you want to rip me apart in the comments, that's fine. I know full well how grubby the Star Wars fandom can be, but I like my guys, so I ain't going anywhere. I got all that Thrawn nonsense to look forward to and potentially more weird depictions of Tarkin in the future. But please, no to Krennic. Leave him dead. Thank you to everyone who watched and helped support my journey in making this video. I generally make content on gaming, so stepping out of that space was a pretty big deal for me. If you enjoyed this video, please sub and do all the other fancy social media stuff. I also have a Patreon that is used to directly support video projects as well as other content. Feel free to check that out, and I will see you all in the next video.